Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Ask the Actuary Special of BWD's In the Know podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Bart Huby, partner and head of football analytics, and affectionately known as the Football Actuary. That's soccer to any listeners in the US and Canada. Bart, welcome, and thank you for sharing your actuarial journey with us today.
Morning, Rob. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Bart. And hopefully by the time this podcast is aired, we'll both be celebrating England's men's football team, emulating the women in being crowned champions of Europe. But before we get into your football passion and how you managed to combine that with an actuarial career, let's start by taking you back to how you got into the actuarial career. And if I can ask Bart, when did you first hear about being an actuary?
Well, that's when I was quite young because an uncle of mine, my mother's brother, was a guy called Brian Clark, who actually was one of the founding partners of Lane Clark and Peacock, which is where I now work. So I've always known about the profession. And then when I got to university, I did mathematics university, went to the careers at the end of it, and I said I wanted to do something mathematical but also business related, and they pointed me at the actuarial profession, which I already knew about. So it was a fairly obvious thing to go into.
And did you meet Mr. Clark?
I did, yes. He died about 10 years ago, but I didn't join LCP until he'd already been retired for about 5 years. So I didn't join the firm till after that. But I knew all about LCP through that connection.
Interesting how that connection has come round in the end. But you didn't start at LCP. Tell me where you started.
I didn't. I started just over 40 years ago now at a firm called Willis Faber Advisory Services. It then became WF Caroon. That was based in the city. So I worked there in the London office for around 10 years, qualified, I think, after 6 years. Of course, the exams were a bit harder in those days, as we always say. I qualified after 10 years there. I then, opportunity came up to manage the Bristol office of WF Caroon, and I took that role in the early 90s.
Okay, and what were WF Caroon doing? Was that in the retirement industry?
Yes, WF Caroon were primarily DB pensions actuaries. In those days, it was primarily actuarial work, a bit of investment work, and so I was doing DB pensions actuary work. Yeah,
working for trustees mainly.
Yeah, in those days there wasn't such a difference between trustee and corporate work. It was you advised a scheme, and because you didn't have exit penalties and things like that, it was a fairly collaborative relationship. There weren't separate actuaries for trustees and corporates at the time.
Right, okay. And were you a scheme actuary during that time?
Again, that role didn't really exist at the time because you didn't have the legislation in place. But I did provide actuarial advice to trustees.
Yeah.
And I had several what we would now call scheme actuary clients, yeah.
Okay. So you said you moved to Bristol, you were heading up their office there. What then drew you across to LCP and Winchester it is that you're based?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so I was there about 18 months. Actually, it was quite a hard period. I think the profession, the DB pensions arena was beginning to struggle a bit. A lot of schemes moving to DC. And
kind of early 90s.
Early 90s, that's right. And the firm I was in, WF Caroon, had a lot of offices. We were one of the smaller ones. So it was quite hard being the leader of that. I found a hierarchical management structure didn't really suit my personality. So I was there, say, for about 18 months, found it I learned a lot about management, I learned a lot about myself, but didn't hugely enjoy it. So I was quite pleased when someone like yourself actually came along and headhunted me for the LCP Winchester office, which was had only recently been established, and the LCP was building that office and wanted a new partner. So I took that job then. That was mid-90s, and I've been at LCP for the last nearly 30 years.
Okay, and so you joined as a partner at Lane Clark and Peacock, as it was then. And 30 years, tell me tell me how your role has evolved over those 30 years then. Presumably you didn't come in as head of football analytics.
No, I didn't. So most of that period I've been a pensions actuary. And then with the legislation coming in, I was primarily a trustee actuary. But I think one area I focused in particularly was public sector outsourcing. So where pensions of public sector employees are transferred out on outsourcing contracts. Back in the early 90s, the government introduced this outsourcing program, and they had a policy that where employees came out of public sector employment, they had to be put into a DB pension scheme by their new employer. And that created a lot of work. The Blair government of 97 reinforced that with PFI. So there was a lot of, but it wasn't a very sensible approach, because you had employees coming out on outsourcing contracts, then going back to other employers. The whole thing was very fractured. So I think probably my sort of proudest achievement as a pensions actuary was I set up the public sector outsourcing committee of the Association of Consulting Actuaries. We was a group of us working in that area, and as well as sort of sharing knowledge, we also sort of explained to the Treasury and to the government actuary why the process that was being used at the time wasn't a very good use of public money, really, because it was creating a lot of risk and no real value, and some employees were losing pension entitlements. So in 2013, partly as a result of our campaigning, the government introduced a new policy called the New Fair Deal, which reversed all of that. And so I think that process was one I found very interesting and indeed very rewarding, to find that we could actually improve the way these things worked for the benefit of both the country and public sector employees.
Yeah, and that area is probably still evolving now, isn't it? And the interaction with Huby and so on.
Yes, all of that. I think it's just the way it works now is there's still plenty of work for actuaries in that area, but I think the whole process is better structured, both to get value for the public purse and to protect the employees involved.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And so the public sector side, you're still presumably also working on private sector DB pensions. You did become a scheme actuary as when that term was created. What sort of schemes were you scheme actuary for? What sort of number and size of all schemes?
About a dozen schemes at one point. The largest one was about 2 billion in assets. So, I enjoyed that process of primarily advising trustees on their responsibilities, on funding, on negotiating with employers. I think, again, my style is to be collaborative, so generally we had good relations with employers, but obviously from time to time you get an awkward situation where there was potentially a lack of funding, and therefore the negotiations side of it would also be interesting. So that whole process of being a scheme actuary, supporting trustees, helping them understand what the key issues were and helping them in their sort of decision making and negotiating, all really interesting and enjoyable time. But I've sort of moved on from that now. I handed over my last scheme actuary appointments about a year ago. Okay. I'm still doing a bit of second partner review, but that's going to finish at the end of this year. And I'll be moving full-time into my new role as... we're now calling it Head of Sport Analytics, actually. Okay. We've expanded our horizons, and not just football, but more widely into potentially the world of sport.
We'll hopefully get on to a little bit of that then. And so, well, I've been very excited to ask you about the football analytics side, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about other sports that maybe you're thinking of getting into or already have. So when did it all start, and how did you get into that area?
So I guess I'm in my early 60s now, so about 5 to 10 years ago, we're sort of looking ahead to what I might do towards the end of my scheme actuary type career. And I'm not someone who believes in retirement in the sense of going on cruises or whatever as the sole thing. So I was looking for what sort of things I might get involved in. And the opportunity came up. LCP, we've built up a really good resource of, I think we call it digital services-based analytics. So we have a very good source of people who are good at both analytics of data and of presenting those in a effective way using online techniques.
Yeah.
And so we were looking as a business, we know that you need to constantly look forward, work out where the world's going, diversify. And we've built up businesses now using those skills in health analytics, energy analytics, and sport analytics, or football analytics was an area that I was particularly interested in seeing if we could build a business. Yeah. So we looked at possibilities. I think one of the keys that we recognized was that while actuaries are very good at analysing data and presenting it in an accessible way, we didn't actually know intimately a huge amount about the football industry. Lots of us are very passionate about it, but actually knowing how it works in practice and having contacts with the industry, we didn't have. So we looked around for a partner firm, and that's how we generated a business. So we after a couple of sort of full starts, we came across a business called Analytics FC, chief executive, a guy called Jeremy Steele, and we've built up a relationship with them. I think it's 7 or 8 years now that we've had this collaborative relationship. So I think it's really interesting and fairly unique partnership. So we are people, as I said, good at data, good at systems, interested in football. They're people who know lots about football. They're very interested in analytics, but don't have the skills to build complex systems. Yeah. So between us, we've developed a powerful relationship. And our key product is a platform called TransferLab. Yeah. That's a player recruitment platform. So we have, I think, just over 30 clients now, football clubs around the world in 12 different countries. Okay. And they're able to access, using this platform, information on, I think it's over 100,000 men footballers, about 20,000 female footballers, across 100 different leagues. And so it's a system that enables people looking to identify talent to access it in a range of ways.
Yeah, and you mentioned 30 or so clients there. Who was the first? Who was the pioneer?
The first client, and I think that there's still a client, West Ham United was. Yeah. So I think what you'll find is there are a number of clubs who do analytics very well themselves. Yeah. Brighton, Brentford, Liverpool, Man City. I think they're the 4 teams who've become really successful at it. 2 very big teams, but 2 much smaller teams who've been very successful on the back of it. What we've done is built a system which is quite similar to what they do. Theirs are very secretive, behind closed door systems. Yeah. Ours is sort of accessible to clubs who want to have that sort of information, but don't have the resource to build their own systems.
Yeah. And Bart, I've heard you talk a little bit about TransferLab before and how it can evolve with your clients. And I think I heard you say something about one of your clients said they wanted to know who in the world is the most successful at diagonal passes from right back or something along those lines. Is that something that you're able to do, constantly evolve and create different kind of
metrics, we call them. Yeah. So the great thing about having the system in-house at LCP is that all the resources is within our firm. So when it will normally come, a club will say, probably sometimes direct to us, but more often through our associate Analytics FC, they'll say, we want a player who can do, you spotted one particularly, a centre-back who can do good diagonal balls. Now, that data isn't available from our data provider in and of itself, but we can adjust our algorithm to say, a ball came from here, it went to there, how effective was that pass, and then allocate that skill set to all the different centre-backs we're looking at. So that sort of ability to tailor our system to clients' demands is very powerful, yeah.
And just talk me through briefly kind of what data does TransferLab take in, and then how does it create the information that clubs might need?
Yeah, so we get what we call raw event data. So every week we get a feed that has the what are called XY coordinates for every action that took place in about, I'd say, in 100 leagues, whichever are playing during that period. and it'll say who was involved in that action, what the outcome of that action was. So that's what we call the raw event data. We've then developed an algorithm, a Markov chain algorithm, that will assess how effective each of those interventions or by the players involved were. So whether that event effectively improved or reduced the chance of their team scoring the next goal. And then you can allocate that value to each player involved, and then sum them up over the whole career or every season for that player, and then produce metrics. And depending on the position of a player, certain skills will be more important. And then you can rate and rank players, filter them by age, by league, by whether they're able to play football in England. That's one of the criteria, because you have to have certain experience to be able to play. So all sorts, a huge amount of information is then made available in a very accessible way for our clients.
Yeah. And does it record things like the pace of the individual of the players?
That is that's a very good question. It's one of the areas we're looking to enhance the system. At the moment, we don't have pure speed data, but you can derive speed from the effectiveness of players at various different actions, for example, dribbling.
Yeah.
But that's a derived value.
Subsequent events and how long it took them to get from one to the other. Yeah.
But pure physical data we don't have in the system. But that's one of the sort of interesting, exciting things about working in this, is you're always looking to get new sources of data and incorporate them into the system in new ways. So you're never standing still, certainly.
Yeah. So how does being an actuary help in that role, and where does the actuarial modelling come into?
Yeah, I must admit, it isn't actuarial work, so it's not subject to any of the TASs. So that's
we'll keep
fortunate. But the actuarial mindset is, I think, is really helpful to me. I mean, we've got lots of people working on the systems within LCP. We're working with our associate analytics SC, but I think the actuarial skill set of being able to look critically at information, understand where it's coming from, and then be confident what's meaningful and actionable, and then communicate that. All of those are skills you develop, I think, as an actuary, and they're as important, if not more so, in a world where you've got information in a format that other people haven't used before. So you're developing new ways of communicating. And I think that sort of ability to critically assess information and how meaningful and actionable it is really valuable.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, I can absolutely see that. It's the way you're presenting complex information, and perhaps giving those confidences around the results that you create. Yeah. And we talked about TransferLab. There's other products as well that LCP already have, and perhaps are in the development. Could you tell me about some of those?
That's right. So one of the areas we've done recently is build a platform for we call it Fixture Hub. It was built for the European Club Association, which is association of the main clubs who compete in European football. They wanted to find a way to help their clubs arrange friendly fixtures against each other more effectively. And we found that they were looking for this through a contact, and so put our hands up and said, we can build that for you. And in fact, we can use our TransferLab analytics to help inform the way in which the clubs look to partner other clubs in friendly. So it's important when you're arranging a friendly that it's a reasonably well-matched fixture. You don't want to be going and playing a team that you beat 10-0. So we use our TransferLab analytics to help match teams of similar strength.
So an extension of that, can your analytics in theory predict who would win between two teams?
I think that's the glorious thing about football, is that nothing's predictable.
Yeah.
So that's why we could help set odds, etc. And we don't actually work in the betting industry, but you could use analytics to help set odds. But football is so unpredictable that you would never be able to predict.
I presume a club might be able to use it to pick a starting 11, perhaps,
Yeah.
against an opposition, what would be the highest likelihood of winning this game?
Yeah, again, that's a function that we have looked at building in. We haven't got it in yet, but running sort of simulations to show which squads would have the highest likelihood of winning is something we have looked at doing.
Yeah.
And we probably will develop at some point, but not there yet.
And I imagine you have no trouble recruiting, most likely internally, colleagues to join you in the analytics of...
Football's an interesting industry. It is quite hard to commercialise. We've got a good client base, so we don't have a huge team. But what we do have is a lot of people within the firm who spend a bit of their time on our football-related work, and it is quite motivational for people to have an opportunity to work in it from time to time. And we're doing a range of interesting additional projects. One of the things we're looking at is working with our health analytics team to investigate the potential concussion risks from heading in football. And we have data now, extensive data on the extent to which footballers head different positions, head the ball, and then we can work with our health analytics team to sort of understand better what the sort of combined risk of extensive heading is with the sort of physiological issues that can arise.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And you said earlier, developing it from football to perhaps some other sports. Which sports have you started to look at, or perhaps already developed something?
We don't have a commercial offering yet in anything, but we've certainly looked at some other sports. Tennis and cycling are two that seem to offer quite interesting opportunities.
Yeah, and cycling's for some time now had been very data heavy, hasn't it? Very interested in marginal gains and such like, and tennis obviously very topical at the moment, with Wimbledon going on at the moment. So no, that'll be an interesting area for us to look at on what you do in those areas. In terms of your future with LCP and the football analytics, you're excited to see where it will go and which global kind of growth it might have as well.
Yes. We're looking at various. Well, I mean, one of the other areas we're working in, beginning to develop our expertise, is in football finance and governance, which is slightly different from pure analytics. But the football industry in England, in the UK in particular, has some issues. There's been a football governance bill that was cut off when the election was called, but is likely to come back under the new Labour government. There's a lot of issues in terms of helping football clubs become more sustainable, but also better corporate citizens. So we're looking to sort of increase our knowledge and our awareness of our abilities in this area. We're working closely with our financial analysis covenant team to develop that, and we are about to publish a report on the sustainability of men's football clubs in England, and we did one last year, and we're shortly going to publish another of those. So it's quite an exciting area to be supporting better governance in English football. Yeah,
and I guess this is another example where a firm like LCP with your actuaries and your covenant team coming together and producing something that's for this purpose in this instance, obviously other overlaps that different parts of LCP.
I think that's one of the joys of working at an organisation like LCP. We have a lot of really good people working in lots of different areas, and the joy of working in football and sport is that a lot of people interested in those. So we can sort of gel those together to help both improve the way in which that the sports industry works, but also make LCP a sort of more interesting place for a lot of people to work.
Well, what I like to do during this podcast is ask you to kind of cast your mind back to when you qualified. You were still with WF Caroon at the time, but we're 30 years on now or so. What advice would you give to somebody around that stage, newly qualified, thinking about what to do with their career, what to do next?
Good question. Yeah, things have moved on a bit. So what I'd advise now is probably a bit different to what it was like then. But I think, but some of the principles are probably very similar. I think, curiosity is now a bit of a cliched word, but I think it's always important to keep your horizons wide and to be interested in things. I think the world will evolve even faster than it has over the past 40 years, and it's important to be aware of what's going on around you. I think AI, we don't know where that's going to go. It's going to have a big effect. But I think actuaries are really well placed, actually, to cope with the world of AI, because AI the real skill will be actually understanding what AI is doing, critically assessing it, and helping people use it effectively. And I think those are actuarial skills. So curiosity, understand what's going on around you. Another one I think would be to get out your comfort zone. Put your hand up if something interesting comes up. Actuaries tend to be very technical people. We know a lot about very in-depth stuff, and it can be quite easy to. I think I did for probably a decade or so of my career. So I knew I was very good at something. I carried on doing it, which is great. But actually, it's even better to get out your comfort zone. And the more you do it, I'm an introvert. Don't find it particularly easy doing that. But the more you do it, the easier it gets, and the less of if things go wrong, the less painful they get. They don't always go wrong. Most of the time, they go right. But another one, actually, I would think in the modern world is create a personality for yourself.
Right.
It should be your own personality, but LinkedIn is a fantastic tool for getting your name out there, your personality out. You can actually experiment with it. If you do a LinkedIn post that doesn't succeed, nobody notices it. If you do one that does, then that's great. So actually developing a personality that suits you, communicates your essence and what you're interested in.
Yeah, no, and I like that. And those three almost come together. So, you talked about being curious, looking around, but, being open to things like AI, but then at the same time, invest in yourself and keep the human side of you going. And just on AI, I've heard somebody talk about actuaries with AI will replace actuaries without AI. And I really like that. And I think it's about embracing AI, not being scared of it, but realizing it's not going to replace us. It's something to enhance, just like the computer, I imagine. People probably thought the computer would replace actuaries. But and then you said in the middle there, being out of your comfort zone, and you won't be the first introvert that's doing a podcast, probably with another extroverted introvert here hosting one. But no, that's really useful advice, I would say, to actuaries who maybe have toiled through the exams, now just want to get on with a job. But yeah, keep your eyes open, see what else is about.
But one final one as well.
Oh, go on, yeah, please do.
Which I think a football, the guy who owns Crystal Palace, Steve Harris, I once heard him say at the end of a podcast, is look after your body as well as your mind. It's really, they go together. I know that in my 30s and 40s, I didn't drink too much, but I drank more than I should, and I didn't do a huge amount of exercise. And I think since I turned 50, I've done a lot of exercise. I now do duathlons and compete in sort of international age group competitions. I'm now fitter than I've ever been, and I think that has helped my mind as much as my body. I think it keeps you competitive, but also the brain works better when your body's fit.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree with that. And sleep, add that one in as well.
I've still got to learn on sleep. I still don't get enough sleep, but that's my next project.
Well, I'm not going to let you off with finishing this podcast without asking you a final question. And I'm going to ask you for your reasons why as well. So the football's on at the moment. We don't yet know who the winners are, but please, Bart, tell me who is going to win the men's Euros this year.
Well, of course, football is a hugely random game, so I'm not going to tell you who's going to win, but I'm going to tell you what I think I think England have got a good chance. I think we should beat the Netherlands in the semis. Get to the final. I think Spain will probably be our opponents there. I think Spain will be the favourites, but it's a random game, and I think we've got so many talented players in the England team. If only Gareth Southgate can get them all pulling together in the right way, I think we've got a chance.
Yeah, and I think if you do enough Monte Carlo simulations, there'll be a small percentage where we
a small percentage, but probably less than 50.
No, that's great. No, thanks, Bart. Appreciate that. Thank you for all your for talking about your actuarial journey, for sharing your advice with the actuaries of the future, and thank you again.
Thanks, Rob. Really enjoyed it.